Well, welcome. Tonight we're actually going to talk about some different aspects of ham radio. We're going to talk about what's called modulation, which is actually what you're doing inside the radio to put your voice onto a signal that you're going to detect with another radio. So we'll talk about different forms of modulation. We'll also talk about how to use ham radio for satellite operations, which I've actually done. It's kind of fun. You can do it with one of these little Baofengs. They work just fine. You do want a different antenna for that, and we'll talk about the antenna that you'll want for that. We'll also talk about radio direction finding, and I have some show and tell items up here as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll finish up with digital modes. And you're probably maybe somewhat aware that you can use radios to actually send text, photos, and digital information. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do with ham radio in addition to just talking on a radio and going through repeaters. And so those are kind of the topics for tonight. So it's T8, A, B, C, and D. So basically the whole block for T8. And we'll start out with the different forms of modulation, and then we'll go through the other topics there. My name is Fred Govedich. I'm KI7TPD, and I'm actually the club president. So you're all invited to come to our club meetings, by the way, and the next one will be on June 8th. And depending on, I guess, how the floor is going, it might be right here. So, but yeah. This is going to work. There we go. Okay, so when you're listening to the radio, what is the most common form of modulation that you're probably listening to when you're in your car, just going down the road, listening to, whatever station it is? So what do you call that dial? So, what was that? FM or AM, right? And so those are two of the most common, actually FM is probably more common now, forms of modulation that you're probably going to come across. Now, AM is amplitude modulation. FM is frequency modulation. Now, what does amplitude mean in terms of a sine wave or waveform? Anybody know what amplitude is? How high it goes. Right, exactly. So if you look at this is the signal. So this is your voice. Okay, so you're going, hello, hello, this is KI7TPD. That's your voice. You then have a wave, this carrier wave, which is being generated in your radio. And what you do is you stick these two things together, okay, and that's what we call modulation. And this is the form that's actually coming out of that antenna. And so you can see that you're taking this waveform, and by putting them together, you can see, well, it goes up here, that's going up and down, but now it's kind of following the same form, right, as this information that you're putting into the radio. Does that make sense? So that's amplitude because you're changing the height. So it gets narrower here, wider there. So it's amplitude, AM modulation. Does that make sense? Everybody's kind of looking at me like, maybe? So you have two waveforms. One waveform is your voice, or digital, or a tone, or whatever you're going to be transmitting. The second one is a carrier wave, and if you kind of think of that as like the wave that's going to carry that information to another radio, it's kind of a rough way of thinking about that. And you're putting them together, and that's what the modulation is. Does that make sense? Okay. Now FM, so using the same information right here, your voice, right? We use the same carrier wave. That's just going up and down. Now, does the height of these peaks right here vary? No. So they're all the same height, right? So it's not amplitude modulation. Now, it's not AM. What you're doing is you're actually changing the frequency. So you can see these ones are closer together, these ones are further apart. Does that make sense? Okay. So this would be FM. Good. Frequency modulation. And so They're just different ways of tacking on information, your voice or whatever, onto this carrier wave. You're modifying that carrier wave. You're modulating it. Does that make sense? Okay. You can always stop me if you have questions or whatever. There's another thing that you can do. So you can, here's amplitude, frequency. There's also phase or PM. Now, it always makes you want to go to sleep, right? It's PM? Yeah. Right. Phase modulation. It's not usually one that we see too much around here, but that's what this one is right here. Actually, FM and PM are fairly similar. So they're the same height, right? But notice the peaks. Here's the information. Here's your carrier wave. You're kind of truncating these ones right here at the peaks. So there are different phases of information that's coming out. So that's PM. That's just another form of modulation. Make sense? Doing good so far? Okay. Okay, FM is frequency modulation. There we go. So that's this one right here. So the frequency is how often these peaks appear. So at a higher frequency, they're closer together. Lower frequency, they're further apart, right? And so what you're doing is you're varying the distance between these different peaks right here. So you can see that peaks are really close together right here. That's why it's darker, right? That's the same as this in AM. They're further apart, right? Where this one's lower in amplitude, they're further apart. And so this is actually carrying exactly the same information as that AM frequency or AM signal as FM. Okay, does that make sense? So why do we like FM better than AM? Anybody thought about that? Stereo. It's like, it sounds better, right? Yeah. What happens during you're driving down the road listening to AM, right? Listening to Tim Nesmith on the radio or something, right? And there's a thunderstorm in the area. Yeah, crackle, crash, right? That's also another characteristic of this FM, is it actually eliminates those spurious transmissions and stuff like that, because that's changing the height. Well, FM doesn't do that, right? So it kind of ignores that noise. So that's another thing why we like FM better than AM, at least for music and things like that. Yeah, you hear these things, right? Yeah, okay. Oh, and actually one other thing. So once you've modulated it, what do you have to do with it? So you've now modulated it, right? You've put your voice on that carrier signal and you transmitted it out on your radio, and somebody else has another radio. You actually do the reverse, right? So you modulate it to send it out, and you demodulate it to then extract that information from that signal so you can hear it. So you modulate and then demodulate to retrieve that information. So I did forget to mention that on there. Okay. So let's look at AM. This is actually, AM is a form of radio transmission that goes way back. The first radios that people listened to in their homes were AM radios, right? Do you know what you need to have to make an AM radio? You ever made a crystal radio before? It's a diode. That's it. I've actually made them. I did it for fun when I was a kid, right? You just take a diode and you have like a little earplug thing and you stick them together. You don't even need a power supply, right? You can't hear it very well, but you just have a little thing the little coil that you use to tune it. That's all you really need. It's very, very simple. You actually need a little more equipment to play around with FM. So AM radios are actually very, very simple. In fact, during World War II, POWs, American POWs, would use razor blades and graphite from pencils to make radios so they can listen to like Allied transmissions and stuff like that. So very simple radios. And again, you're just basically varying the signal, the amplitude, right? Now, what is even older than AM? It's actually a form of AM. So before they had voice or even music that they transmitted over radios, what did they do? Yeah, dit, right? Should have wore my what about, and then I have in Morse code, don't you understand, right? We're actually learning Morse code, right? Yeah, it was Morse code. And we call that CW, continuous wave. And that's kind of what it looks like right there. So essentially, you're turning on a signal and off a signal, right? So every time you hit that little button, it sends out a signal. However long you hold that little switch, you create a DIT or a DAW, right? So what was the famous transmission from the Titanic after it hit the iceberg? Yeah, did-it, da, did-it, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's like, help, right? That was during a time when they didn't have voice transmissions, right? They were just using, dits and DAWs, which actually goes, way back, with old train lines and stuff like that. They would use Morse code to send things down a wire, right? Now they're just doing it with radio waves. And so it's actually a form of AM because, look, we have on, we have off. That's amplitude, isn't it? There's none. It's off. Or it's on. That's a form of AM transmission. Okay. And then, of course, they came up with amplitude modulation, which we've just talked about there. Now, AM's great, but it's kind of wasteful. So if you look at an AM signal, that's this right here, okay? That center is your carrier wave, right? Right in the center. And you actually have the information right here above and below the center point where your carrier wave is, okay, your carrier signal. We call that upper sideband and lower sideband. Now, looking at this, does this kind of look the same as that? But just a mirror image? Yeah. So both halves of this, upper sideband and lower sideband, actually have the same information, same data in there. And you don't really need that, do you? If you just need to get that information out, you only need half of that signal, right? So what you can do is you actually cut out this, you cut all of this out right here, or conversely, you can cut all of that out and basically get rid of half of that AM signal that's going out over the airways. And we call that single sideband. So we have people here that have done single sideband, right? So what are we using single sideband for? What was that? Long distances, right? Because guess what? All of the energy that you would be putting into this AM signal right here, you cut all that off, you have the same amount of energy. Now you can put that into just this part of the signal. You can hear it further away. So I've made contacts to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Germany, Italy, England, Canada, but they're close, right? Every state in the United States using single sideband. And I can go further because I'm concentrating that energy into a smaller portion of that radio spectrum. Does that make sense? It's pretty cool. That 2-meter radio, right? So this radio, I have things dangling off of it, so I have to be a little bit careful, right? I can hit repeaters around here, right? But using 2 meters, single sideband, you've got what? Arizona, Nevada. Yeah. It's all over the place. Yeah. Now you can't use this radio for it. This one's just an FM radio, so you have to have a radio that will do 2-meter single sideband, which I have. You can get them, right? But then you can do long distance contacts using essentially the same band as this radio right here, which is really kind of cool. Okay. Does that make sense? So you're really kind of concentrating your signal to go farther. And the other person at the other end is doing the same thing. And when that signal arrives, your radio will actually add this back in there so it can extract the voice or whatever from it. So your radio actually kind of knows how to do that, and that's part of the demodulation in the radio as well. Now there are a couple of things. How do you know if I'm going to be on lower sideband or upper sideband? You don't want to guess, do you? What was that? Well, yeah, you said it. I can set it to upper sideband or lower sideband. But if I'm talking to you and you're in Arizona, how do I know which one to be on? Because if I'm on the opposite one, it doesn't work. Kind of sounds funky. So how do you know? There's a rule. There's a convention. It's called that. So if you're below 10 megahertz, below lower sideband. If you're above it, again, you're upper sideband. So you just go, okay, 10 megahertz, that's our cutoff, right? Below it, lower sideband. Above it, upper sideband. So is 144.25 megahertz above 10 megahertz or below 10 megahertz? That's a stupid question, right? It's above, right? So which one of these am I going to use for 2 meter single sideband? Upper. So using that kind of rule of that convention, right? Then you know where to look for those signals. Now, of course, then you get into digital modes and we mess you up. But okay, this is for your like voice and that kind of stuff. And actually CW too, right? Yeah. This is Ken Munford, our fellow teacher. And he's the guru of CW. You probably dream in CW, don't you? Yeah. We're just learning. We just have nightmares about CW. Actually, we're doing good. So does that make sense? Okay, so let's review. What's AM? Amplitude modulation. What's FM? Frequency modulation. What's PM? Afternoon, afternoon, right? P equals phase, right? Phase modulation. Good. What's CW? Well, we use it for Morse code, but it means continuous wave. Okay. And what's single sideband? Half of the AM signal, right? And you can have upper and lower on that. Okay, good. By the way, I don't go through the questions. You probably noticed that. I figure you guys can do that part, right? Okay. I do have the questions stuck on here, so if you want to look at them. This is just kind of, have you guys seen this chart before? You have one? Okay. This is just to kind of orient you a little bit. Where's 10 megahertz on here? Can't really read it. It should be right there. Right? Right? So everything on this side over here is going to be what? Above 10 megahertz, right? So it's upper sideband, right? Everything down here is going to be, it's below 10 megahertz, lower sideband. Okay. Okay, I've already kind of talked about FM. So here's FM and PM. Again, you're really only going to run into FM for the most part. And now we kind of talked about the, why we listen to FM stations. That's this noise rejection. So you don't hear that thunderstorm that's coming across, right? FM is where you're going to be, if you're looking at repeaters, like local repeaters and stuff like that. This radio is really an FM radio. That's all it does, right? Fancier radios will do, bigger radios, will do AM, FM, single sideband, stuff like that. But this is an FM radio. So why do you think we use FM for something like this? Okay, noise reduction. And I want to know what Ron sounds like. Because I can recognize Ron by his voice when he gets on the radio. Oh, that's Ron. Right? it sounds better, right? It sounds good. Yeah, that's really the only reason, right? This has much better audio quality. Now, the thing is, if I'm going and talking to somebody on the East Coast or in Australia, I don't care what they sound like. I'm just so happy I made a contact. And sometimes you're like, okay, I can kind of make out that voice or whatever. It sounds a little wonky and you kind of tune things. It doesn't really sound probably like that person as much as FM does, right? But this is really nice, good quality sound. So we can get on those repeaters and we can listen to each other and it sounds like our voice, right? Same reason that we're listening to an FM radio station, right? Because it sounds good. Okay. And that's what you're going to be using on VHF and UHF for the most part. Except for when you're doing the single sideband. And then even there, they don't sound exactly right, do they? No. Yeah, they always kind of sound a little off. Okay. What was that? Donald Duck. Yeah. And what's funny is no one's ever exactly on the right frequency when you're doing single sideband either. Because you can actually look on a spectrum, and you're here, you're right on 144, 25, right? And the next person is on 144, 26. And so you kind of like move your signal over a little bit, and then someone else gets on there, and they're 144, 23, and so everybody's just a little off. If you have the correct equipment, yes, you can. Yeah, I have, it's actually a software-defined radio that I have plugged into, I have an antenna, and I can actually see the spectrum, so I can put it on the frequency that I'm looking at, and I can see all of the radio signals that are coming in. It's pretty cool. I can do it on the repeater too. I can actually go on the input and I can see how well everybody's radio is actually performing. Some are a little bit off, some are right on, some are a little high. But with FM, it doesn't matter as much. With single sideband, it does. Okay. Yeah, good question now. Okay. So we're sending all of these signals out into the world around us, right? Do you think they're all the same? Do you think they might vary a little bit? Yeah, and not just like, okay, this one sounds like music and this one sounds like a voice. Think about how much space on the spectrum a radio wave might take up. So some are going to be really wide, right? Some signals. So that AM signal that we're sending out is going to be twice as wide as a single sideband, right? Because you're only using half of it. Have you ever thought about that FM station that's sending out the music? They're really wide. But when Ken's on his radio, it's that wide. And we call that bandwidth. It's literally the width that you're taking up on that radio spectrum. Oh, come on in. And so different types of signals, this is kind of showing the relative bandwidth up here, are going to take up different portions of that radio spectrum. CW is really, really narrow, okay? So right here, here's CW. So this is bandwidth down here, okay? CW, about 150 hertz, right? Really, really narrow, right? Single sideband, now voice, 2 to 3 kilohertz. So that's that one little half, right? Digital, well, it depends on what you're doing. That's why I have this one up here. These are all different digital modes. So like this one is really narrow. That one's really wide. That one's kind of in between. So depending on the digital mode you're using, it can be anywhere from 500 to 3,000 hertz. Okay? And actually, Dennis over here and Ron, we do digital, there's a digital net on Tuesday, and you'll be communicating on one digital mode, and then they'll change it up to this one that's like, you're like this wide, and then they'll turn to another one's like this wide, right? the thing is, if it's a wider mode, you transmit more information quickly. So the width of that in a digital mode actually is kind of telling you how much information you can transmit at a given time. So a wider mode is going to go, your signal is going to go faster. Your message is going to get to somebody faster. Make sense? Okay. Whereas like CW, what are you doing? You're sending one letter at a time, right? So it's just a little bit of information each time. So that's where like the width of some of these things come in. AM voice, okay, so again, that'll be a radio that you're going to be transmitting. Usually you don't do AM anymore. You can, but if you're AM voice, about 6 kilohertz, okay? So remember, that's 3 kilohertz. Just put a dot right there. So that's your full AM, right? It's the 2 sidebands together. AM broadcast, 10 kilohertz, okay? A little better quality signal there. FM voice, so on this radio right here, 10 to 15 kilohertz, so a little bit wider than our AM broadcast. There's actually more information being transmitted there, okay? We do have FM narrowband, and that's a ham radio thing. So this is like your whole thing. It's 15 kilohertz right there. 5 to 6 kilohertz right here, that's your narrowband. So a lot of actually like police radios and things like that can actually be in this narrowband right here. And then FM broadcast, this is your radio station right here, 150 kilohertz. You look at one of these things on a spectrum, it's like that wide. You look at like a ham transmission, it's like that wide. Then you go over to like, 91.1 or something like that, and it's just like this huge thing. Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, on my my radio, I can actually set it. I can set it to single sideband, AM, FM. I can even tell it I want narrowband or basically broadband broadcast, and it just basically opens up the filter on, do you want a narrow filter because you want to, the filter basically ignores all the stuff that's outside of it so you can hear it better. I can open it up all the way. I can hear the whole thing. Yeah, radios are pretty cool with this stuff. Yeah. You say you opened up, you hear multiple broadcasts? You can. If they're close together, yeah, you can. And it gets garbled. Yeah. That's why you actually put a filter in there. So if you have 2 signals that are like right next to each other, sometimes you'll hear them both. And you put a filter on there, and you're like this, you won't hear the other one. For example, when we're doing the digital net on Tuesdays, the CW, they have a CW net that is at 500, which is like just at the bottom of where we are. We're kind of up in here, about 1500. And you can hear the CW. So I always turn my filter on, so I'm just listening to the portion of the spectrum that I want to listen to. And I don't hear the CW. And then they transmit something this wide, and I'm always struggling to get the filter open in time to get the signal. But yeah, but yeah. So you use filters to kind of block out other transmissions that are close to what you are listening to. So yeah, yes, you can. So that's kilohertz, right? Look at what TV, commercial video, 6 megahertz. So that's like huge compared to these other things, right? So any questions? Does it make sense? So think of the width, the bandwidth is kind of the amount of information that you're sending out, right? CW, dits and dots, right? Doesn't take very much. Single sideband, well, you're using half of that AM transmission, okay? AM, you're using the whole thing, and it depends on if you're doing like voice or your broadcast. So this is your commercial station right here. FM, that again, that fidelity, right? There's more information in there. Okay, so voice is going to be about the same as the AM broadcast. You've got narrowband. And then your music station is going to be wider. And then your TV is going to be order of magnitude larger, because not what are you sending with the TV signal? So if I'm watching TV, what am I receiving? Yeah, I'm receiving all the pictures, the colors, right? All that information that's going to be scanned onto that TV, or nowadays it's digital, right? The sound, right? And actually probably a bunch of other information. So there's a lot of information going with that video. So it's wider, right? Does that make sense? Everybody's just kind of like, it's better than diodes, right? Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like diodes. Okay. So any questions about that? Now let's talk about some fun stuff. Actually, that other stuff's kind of fun stuff too. But what can you do with some of these radios? So I've actually used this radio to make contacts with the satellite. It was actually at a ham fest in Arizona, and they had a little demo. They said, "Oh, bring your HT with you, and we'll get you talking on a satellite." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool, right?" It doesn't work great with this antenna though. It kind of sucks because I just have this, right? To really do it, I have this one actually configured for something else. You need something like that, right? And if I know the satellite's over there, I can basically aim this at that satellite and get this signal, right? So remember, it's the antenna, right? I'm sure Ken's going to talk about that, right? The antenna is actually the most important part of your entire radio, right? Well, actually, that's a good question. So this is what's called a directional antenna, right? In fact, this one I have set up for radio detection. So if you're transmitting, I can aim it at you and I know you're transmitting. Actually, I have to sweep it around and figure out who's transmitting, right? But this is directional. So this tells me, this receives the signal from this end and it ignores the signal from this end, right? So if I had that on my chimney, okay, and it's aimed over there, and Ron's over there, am I going to hear him very well? Now, what if I'm aimed over here? Am I going to hear him? I may not hear him at all, right? So I actually want an antenna that's omnidirectional that can receive from multiple directions. This, I want it from over there. I want the signal coming from one end. So that's a very good question.
Okay, another question. As I talked to you before a couple of weeks ago, I did the Omni television antenna.
Yep.
Okay. And that just sits, but it picks up north, south,
Yep.
west.
Yep.
Why couldn't you have something like that? That antenna for the same thing.
So, okay, so there's two parts to your question. Now, why wouldn't I want to use an omnidirectional antenna for doing like satellite and stuff? Because it's a weak signal, and I want to receive just that signal and block out everything else because it's noise. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to hear what's behind me. I want to hear what's in front of me, right? And so using a directional antenna, I'm just receiving from a very specific direction. Now, what I could do, and actually what I have done, I have a directional antenna like this that I can turn. So if I know Ron is there, I can turn my antenna towards him, receive his signal, and then I want to listen to Linda, and I'll turn my antenna over here and I'll listen to her. But I have to have what's called an antenna rotator that does exactly that. It rotates the antenna around. George has one of those on his, doesn't he? And he can go, oh yeah, I'm receiving the signal from the north or from the south or from wherever. And so you can rotate it around. And so what it's doing is it's actually allowing you to receive weak signals from a specific direction to a greater degree than, just receiving stuff from everywhere. You're kind of pulling the signal out of the noise, if that makes sense.
If you aim your directional antenna at Linda's directional antenna, would it be greater?
Yep, because hers is amplified in the direction that she's aiming it, and mine's receiving in that direction. So yes, and that's exactly what people do. Yeah. In fact, you'll see that if you those dishes that you had for your internet and TV and that kind of stuff. That's a directional antenna, and you're aiming it at a tower that's over there, You don't want to receive signal from over here. You just want to receive that signal from that tower that's 10 miles away. That's exactly what you're doing. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay. Okay, so fun stuff. What's a satellite? It's way up in the air, right? In fact, it's everything above 50 kilometers. So, International Space Station, that's a satellite. There's a whole bunch of communication satellites up there. And there's a bunch of satellites that are actually sent out by with amateur radios on them for amateur radios to amateur radio operators to use. So if I know that there's a satellite coming across, I can actually use that like a repeater and talk to somebody on the other side of the planet that I can't see, but they can see the satellite and I can see the satellite, so we can actually both communicate through that satellite. Technically, yes, but none of them do, because they're just basically kind of up and down. Obviously, telecommunication satellites and more advanced satellites, yeah, they're doing that. But the ham ones, they're generally not doing that. Now, the space station probably does. So, these little things right here, these little cute little cubes, I just gave you the name of that satellite, it's CubeSat. They literally sent a bunch of these things up to the space station. They had an astronaut who was going to go for a spacewalk, opens up the airlock and goes, boop. This kicked him out. Eventually, they're going to burn up in the atmosphere, but during their orbit, you can use it. In fact, there was a group, we were at Embry-Riddle. Yeah, they're like this little cubes, right? They're that big. You weren't at that. They had a ham fest in Arizona where it was at an aeronautical university, and these students actually got their ham licenses and built one of these things that they then had sent up to the space station and pushed out the airlock so they could do a bunch of experiments. They had all these little things built in there, different radios, and they had different sensors and stuff like that. And then they could sit there in Prescott, Arizona, when that satellite went across the top, they could download what's called telemetry, which is the information that is being transmitted by that satellite. So it's like what's going on, what's its orientation, what is it doing, all that kind of stuff. And so they did this as a school project. I thought that was really cool. And they got their ham licenses, they got their general licenses, in fact, and they're doing all these different experiments with one of these little CubeSats. Excellent question. It's actually the next slide, but that's okay. Oh, maybe it's not the next slide. There, it's that slide. Software. This is actually a program that I have. It's a satellite tracking program. So there's a database of all of the different satellites that are out there. So you register it, right? And this has the information on its velocity, so how fast it's moving, its orbit. It can tell you when it's going to be coming up over the horizon. And actually, it'll even, like this circle, oh man, you can't see it. There's this little circle, like right there. That's actually the International Space Station. So that little circle that's sitting right here, that's who can hear the International Space Station. So it gives you all of that information. It'll tell you when it's going to come up over the horizon, how long it's going to be in the sky at what's called azimuth, so like, the angle up to it and all that kind of stuff. It gives you all that information. So then I can go outside with my antenna and my cell phone and go, it's at this angle at this time, aim it in the right direction, and hear that satellite. Does that make sense? So, computers. Now, in the olden days, like before computers, you had to know all of that information. Then you'd probably, calculate all of the stuff that this program will tell you. Nowadays, you just download a program and it keeps track of all that stuff, which is actually really nice. And this is open source software, and this is all the information about that satellite. And actually, I can click on a button over here, and it gives me the frequencies for both the uplink and the downlink. So signals going up and signals coming down for that satellite or for the International Space Station. And I can tell you what radios are on there, what frequencies they're listening to, what frequencies they're transmitting on, the power. What do you think the power, how many watts do you think these satellites are transmitting on? What was that? Yeah. So most people are like, wow, it's like 100 watts, right? Probably 1 or 2 watts. So that radio right there probably has more power than one of those satellites. But why can that satellite hear like several hundred miles? Yeah, line of sight's great. It's like, yeah, it's way up there. That's what same thing with repeaters, right? So the repeaters are on top of mountains. They're only transmitting on 5 watts or something like that, right? But they have that line of sight. They're high up, so their signal goes further. So good.
Does that also tell you how long you can talk?
Yeah, it'll tell you how long it's going to be visible. And once it's off the horizon, it's gone. Yeah. And actually, the funny thing is, like I said, you can listen to them with one of these, and you have to track it. It's gone. It's not that fast. You probably have a few minutes. But yeah, you can actually, you just kind of track it across the horizon, even with something like this. It's pretty cool. So just a couple of things. I mentioned these. Uplink, okay? This is the frequency that you're going to transmit to the satellite, up. It's going from you're down, right? It's up. You're sending a signal up to the satellite. Downlink is the frequency that the satellite is transmitting on, and it's sending it down to you. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what you do. So dual VFO radios, you have one set to transmit on, one to listen on. That's exactly what you do. Yeah. Because that's what these things are doing. These are going to be 2 different frequencies, right? And so it's going to depend on, that's where you look it up in that satellite tracking. It'll actually give you the frequency that's the uplink and the frequency that's the downlink, because they can be completely different for every single satellite. Sometimes they're both VHF, sometimes they're both UHF, sometimes it's VHF and UHF. It just kind of depends on how they configured that satellite when they send it up. Yeah. It's not like a repeater here where it's always, the same offset for VHF or UHF. Yeah, these ones it's that frequency and it's that frequency, and they'll tell you. They tell you what it is, but you have to look it up. Yeah, and they do have kind of restricted uplink and downlink frequencies that some of these satellites use. So what they're trying to do is just say, okay, if you're looking for a satellite on this band, it's going to be in this range. Right here, that might be what you're asking. Is there like a place where you're looking for satellites? Is that kind of, yeah. So for us, this is where you're going to find the satellites, between 145.8 to 146. So the satellites are going to be in there for VHF. UHF is going to be 435 to 438. So what they've done is they've taken the spectrum and they've tried to kind of split it up so there's less interference. So if the satellites are using these frequencies, then nobody else uses those frequencies for like voice or something else. So they've kind of set aside portions of the band so that you're not interfering. So you don't want to get on your radio and set it to 145.8 and start talking to somebody, because you're going to interfere with the satellite. Unless you want to talk on the satellite, then you can do that. And that actually goes for a lot of different things. Repeaters are in certain parts of the spectrum. What they've done is they've tried to kind of split up digitals in another part so that you're not stepping on each other in those frequencies. So, does it make sense? Okay, yeah. That's what we call a band plan in those. So an Oscar, that's just a orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio. It's not a guy in a trash can that's grumpy. Okay. So a few things that, because we're dealing with space, there's some other kind of terms that we have to think about with these satellites. An apogee. Actually, that's a software company too, but we're not talking about video games. So apogee, okay, this is the point in the orbit that it's the furthest from the Earth, okay? So a satellite, if you think about it going around the Earth, is its orbit going to be perfectly circular? Yeah. It's kind of oval shaped, right? So as it's going around the Earth, at certain points, it's going to be further away from the Earth. Other points, it may be closer to the Earth, okay? So the apogee is when it's the furthest from the Earth, and the perigee is when it's closest to the Earth, right? And that's good to know, because remember you asked, how long is it going to be there? Which one of the, if your satellite is going to be at apogee when it's over you, is it going to be in the sky for longer or for a shorter period of time? It's further, right? It's going to go up and back, right? If it's closer, it's like up and back. So that's going to be kind of important for knowing that, okay? What's a beacon? You actually hear these things. So what do we use a beacon for? Well, is it general communication? I mean, so if I go and I'm going to go listen to a beacon, I don't know why I'd want to do that. I guess setting my watch, I can do that because that's actually a beacon. You're not sending a signal to it, you're receiving it, right? Okay. And so this beacon actually has some of the information about that satellite. So it's this sending information. Here I am. I'm doing this. It's some of that telemetry that thing is transmitting, right? Okay. There actually is a beacon that. So anybody have a atomic clock? How does it know what time it is? It's a beacon. It goes, at the beep, it is now. Well, actually, there is one that does that. But it's sending out a signal to your clock that says, yep, it's 7 o'clock or whatever, right? Yeah, that's just a beacon. It's just sending that signal out all the time. Okay. Now, what is Doppler shift? I know you're familiar with this. Okay, yeah, Doppler radar. You can tell the storm's coming at you, right? So how does it do that? Well, yes, that's what radar does. But if something's moving, it shifts that signal slightly, right? So when you hear a siren, well, you're a former police officer, right? So when you're cruising down the road with those lights and the siren, right? Does it sound the same to you as it does to me standing here? So if you're coming toward me, so if your car is going this way, right? What does it sound like it's over there? When it's coming towards me. Does it sound the same? It's higher pitch, right? Right? And then it goes past me, right? You can hear it. That's Doppler shift. So it's a change in the frequency because of the relative speed of the two objects, right? Well, satellites are moving, right? In relation to you standing on the ground. It's the same thing as listening to that police car drive past you, right? It's going to change the frequency of the radio slightly as it's moving towards you and then moving away from you. So it actually sounds different in the radio as it's moving towards you and it's moving away. And that's another thing that satellite software will tell you what that Doppler shift is to your location, so you can adjust your radio so you're right on the frequency. And then you have to keep adjusting it as that satellite moves by. It's kind of cool, isn't it? It's the same thing. We can, anybody amateur astronomer? With your telescopes? It's kind of fun. So we talk about blue shift and red shift, right? That's Doppler effect. It's the same thing. So things that are moving towards you and moving away from you in space. Same exact thing. Okay. And we already kind of mentioned elliptical orbit, just not round, right? Okay, a LEO. Sometimes we use that term for something else, right? Law enforcement officer? Nah, not in this case, right? We don't have police officers floating around in space, I hope. It's a low Earth orbit, right? That makes sense. So there are things that are close to the Earth. There are things that are further from the Earth. The things that are close to the Earth and probably aren't going to be there for too long because they're going to burn up in the atmosphere, those are low Earth orbit objects. And another thing we have to worry about is also what's happening to that antenna. So if this is my antenna, or my satellite, sorry. So here's my satellite. It's floating through space. Is it always going to be like this at my position? Well, no, it's going to kind of rotate and stuff like that as it moves around. That's what we're talking about, spin fading. So your antenna kind of points away as it moves through space. Especially those little CubeSats. They have no propulsion system except for the astronaut that kicked it out of the door, right? So they may be spinning, and so the antenna is like doing this and stuff like that. So you'll get this spin fading, so the signal will vary depending on where that antenna is aimed. So there's some things that we have to kind of worry about when we're looking at satellites. It's kind of fun though, right? I mean, people love playing with satellites, and you can do that with your technician license, which is pretty cool stuff. Okay. And I kind of already talked about this. You just basically download this software, and it gives you all this information. And some of the stuff you need to know, who is Kepler? Anybody know? Kepler? Remember that from like high school, probably, a couple of years ago, right? Yeah, he was like figuring out like where the planets were and all that kind of stuff, right? So we have these Keplerian elements. Those are the things like, it describes the orbit, the speed, the distance, all of those different things that basically, if you know all of that information, you know exactly where that satellite is, right? And so if you had your own satellite that just got kicked out the door, you want to know what those Keplerian elements are so you can find your satellite, right? And for all of the ones that they put out there, they load them into a database, and you can just download it. It's in the software. It's go download, boop, here's all your information. But the program is actually using these Keplerian elements to plot exactly where that satellite is. That's why I can show you a map and say, yep, it's right there. And it'll even show you, like if I have this open on my computer, I can watch the ISS and look at where it's going. It'll even tell me where it's going to be in an hour. So I can be out there, okay, it's going to be here in an hour. It's going to be at this angle. I can be there with my antenna ready to go, which is pretty cool. Okay. Whoa. Keep forgetting this delay. Okay. So who can communicate with satellites? Sure. If it's on a frequency that you can communicate on with your ham license, you can use it. Now, of course, if it was, do they have any that are like HF? They're mostly VHF and UHF. I mean, if they had one that was doing 40 meters, that would be kind of ridiculous. You wouldn't be able to do it with a technician license. You could do it with a general license. But most of these things are going to be, VHF and UHF. So yeah, with a technician license, you're good. Now, can you listen to them without a license? Yes. Yeah, definitely. You can always listen. You just can't transmit. So the license allows you to transmit, right? So right now, you could go outside, get this software, and listen to people talking as the satellite goes across the sky. Perfectly legal. And then you're all excited because you got to get your license, and then you can talk to them. And then once you get that license, then you can talk to them as well. Yeah. So the uplink, you have to have a license. Downlink, you don't. Okay. So what do you need to know about the satellite? Well, what's it transmitting on, right? We just talked about that, right? What frequency does the radio on that satellite transmit on, and what does it receive on? And what you do is you look at the uplink / the downlink, and because we're so original, we go, oh, UHF, VHF, so it's UV. U/V. Now you know the uplink is what? It's UHF, right? The downlink is VHF. And these are actually some of the radios on the International Space Station. It's a little blurry. There are UU ones, there are UV ones, and there are VV ones. And that's just telling you what band the uplink and the downlink are. And then this information right here, it's actually giving you the frequencies that you can listen in on. So you have to know basically what band it's on. Okay. Now you can listen, you can transmit on those frequencies. What else do you need to know? What was that? Okay, when? Well, yeah, you need to know what the satellite is. Yes, definitely. So if I want to talk to the satellite, am I going to talk on AM, FM, single sideband, or like Ken, am I going to do CW? So what do satellites do? All of the above. Right? So yeah, well, maybe not AM, but they do single sideband, FM, and CW, and digital data. You can actually, and this is kind of fun, you can do this now. If you have what's called a TNC, which is that little box that's dangling off my radio over there, you can actually connect it to your radio, connect that to your computer, leave it on, and receive pictures from the International Space Station. They transmit pictures as they go across the sky. And you can sit there and receive a picture, and maybe part of another picture. The next time it comes over, you can receive the rest of that picture, and receive another picture, because it's always sending them. Sometimes you get two of the same picture, whatever. But it's basically sending out slow scan TV signals from the International Space Station. So you can basically get pictures from the ISS. That's cool. So we have people in our club that actually do that all the time. They basically have their radios out there listening for these pictures to come down, and they just have their computer decoding it, which is pretty cool. So you have to know what it's sending, right? Oh, yeah.
All the astronauts are
hams. Well, not all of them, but many of them, yes. Yeah. Well, the ones right now, they're not. It's not always the case that they have all of them. But yes. And you can talk to them. I've actually heard them. They'll talk to kids. It's great. They'll make arrangements ahead of time, and they know that, so-and-so's class is going to be listening to them, and they'll have a ham operator in that classroom, which could be you. And you've made prior arrangements, and yeah, you can talk to an astronaut on the space station as it goes over, and the kids are just like, whoa, that's cool, yeah. Or if you're at Hamfest, the hams that are, 60 years old are going, whoa! We're all kids, right? Yeah, it's really fun, right? And all you need is a VHF, UHF radio, that thing right there, and a directional antenna. It helps, right? And you can use other kinds of antennas, but a small beam, which is that thing right there, it's a Yagi, is best because you can aim it at that satellite. That's all you need. This is actually for direction finding. I'll talk about that next. So I have this one configured for something else, but you could use that antenna for that. Yeah. So that's really cool, right? That's all you need is just a VHF, UHF radio. And what you might hear, that telemetry telling you what's going on with that satellite. You can hear people talking, right? And it's great. Now, one thing. So these things, do you think these satellites have great batteries? I mean, the satellite's this big, right? You can have like a car battery in there? No. No. You might have a lithium-ion battery in there, right? So something that's like on your phone, something like this, right? What's keeping that battery going? Sunlight. So there's a little solar panel on there, right? So you don't want to run the batteries down. I mean, it'll recharge, but then you just pissed off half the world because their satellite just burned out for half a day. Has to charge its batteries. So you want to be careful. You want to only transmit the minimum, and this is true for most things, right? The minimum amount of power needed to make a contact, right? And so what you do when you're communicating with a satellite is you transmit and you listen to what's coming back down out of the satellite. And if your signal sounds about the same as that beacon that's sending out the signal, then you're about the right power. You're not overpowering and using up the power in the battery of that satellite. Because you don't want to like get on there and like transmit like 100 watts and everybody on half the planet can hear you, but it lasts for about 2 seconds before the satellite shuts down, right? Because you don't want to run those batteries down. Yes. It's a menu in one of these things. You just basically change the power on it. Yeah, it depends on the radio. Most of the mobile radios like I have in my car, it's actually, you can do it right on the front panel. These are a pain in the butt, but you can do it. You have to go into a menu and it's like power and you basically key up and key down. But yes, that's exactly what you do. Okay. So that's kind of fun, right? Okay. So now this is what your question was. What's this little thing over here? So that's fun. Playing with satellites. Well, this can be kind of fun too. So this, the way I have this set up right here, this is actually for radio direction finding. Let's see if Ken's radioactive. But you can hear the tone, right? Oh yeah, and Ron has the little Elper. That's actually a much fancier one. But this one I have set up so I can sit here like this. And if somebody's transmitting, right now it's just noise. But you can basically listen to the tone and go, okay, hear how it changes. Yeah, it's made out of tape measure. Yeah. Hey, you can make it out of a tape measure that you get at Harbor Freight. It's cheap, that's for sure, right? The antenna, $2. I can't remember how much that box cost. It was like $20 or something. I had to ship it from Australia. It wasn't that much though. You want to show the little Elper? That one's a little more. What'd you pay for those, Linda? Yeah. That's a professional one. No, I've tried. So this does the same thing as that, right? This one is a professional one, so if an airplane crashes or something like that, they have like a little tone that they send out. You can use this to find that crashed airplane. Actually, I can use that too.
Little indications of how strong your signal is, so you can pretty much tell what direction you're going, how strong the signal is, kind of gives you a sense of how close you are.
Yeah.
That can also be used with like tagging sharks.
Yep. Oh, exactly. Yeah. I'm a biologist, right? You see the biologists out there tracking elk or deer? Same thing. It's a radio transmitter sending out a signal. You can use these things to track them. That's exactly right. And we have a game. Yeah, we have a game.
We'll hide a transmitter,
Called a Fox Hunt.
and then you'll be timed to how long it takes you to find the transmitter.
And the first person that gets it gets a trophy. Yeah, same thing. It's exactly the same thing, right? Yeah, it's exactly the same thing, right? So it's a fun game, right? And it's a practical skill. If an airplane, so hams in this club, Merlin specifically, have used particularly that kind to find downed aircraft. Driving around. Well, he's done it from the air too, because he was actually Civil Air Patrol. But yeah, he's done it on the ground too. I've actually done the same. Yeah. He's fun because he'll hide the transmitter and you're walking around a parking lot going, and everybody in town is like, and then you kind of stop and you're like, and people just think you're like on something, right? But it's fun. It's basically a game. That's what they call a fox hunt. And guess what it takes? A receiver. That's what this blue box is right here. That's just a receiver. And what's this? A directional antenna, right? Again, I don't want an omnidirectional one because I want this to tell me what direction that signal is coming from. So if it's coming from Linda, I want it to point that way. And you kind of sweep it back and forth because maybe Linda's moving or as I'm moving, maybe there's obstructions and so the signal's going around it. And so you kind of sweep it back and forth You go, okay, well, the signal's still coming from that direction. Well, it's still coming from that direction. And you get closer. And these things actually have an attenuator built in. So as you get closer, the signal's getting stronger, right? It'll automatically attenuate it so it's not as strong. So you'll actually hear the tone change as you get closer. And then you go past it and you're like,
So like if your transmitter is next to some metal buildings, those metal buildings can reflect the signal off and give false signals.
yeah. And Merlin's really good at that. He had it hidden in his truck out in the parking lot over here. And we started out in the park down here. And because of the shape of the truck, it's sending the signal kind of down, bouncing it off of the garbage bins out here, bouncing it off this building. So you're kind of walking around trying to figure out where that path is. And you eventually get there. And I'm standing next to the truck going, I know it's around here somewhere. And it's kind of like, oh, there it is. But it's a game. It's fun, right? You get a trophy. And of course, practical skills, well, finding downed aircraft or jammers, interference, things like that too. Lost hikers, elk, things like that.
Also, if you have your microphone up here, it's stuck in transmission. We'll use this to try and identify where it's coming from. This person might not even know the transmission.
Yeah.
That their equipment is transmitting. We'll use it to find out where it's at, so we can turn it off.
Yeah, exactly. Or you get some kids who go on Amazon and buy some of these because they're $25, right? And they're in their backyard going, playing Super Spy, right? On a ham band. We'll go find them and say, you can't do that. It's illegal for you to transmit on these radios. So there's things like that too. I've heard kids on repeaters and you're just like, ooh. They got daddy's radio and they're going to be in trouble. Yeah. Or you have people that actually do that intentionally, which can be bad. We've had that in the past here too. But that's not the only contest. One of the fun things about ham radio is making contact with people that are a long ways away from you. Like I said at the beginning here, so I've made contacts with Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. I've actually made contacts on every continent except Antarctica. They do have ham radios down there, though. You got to enter. Oh! Yeah, we're jealous. But they actually have these contests where they'll go to some island out in the middle of somewhere, just out in the middle of nowhere. They'll stick a ham station on there for like a week, and everybody tries to make contact with them. It's a contest. Ken does SOTA, Summits on the Air, right? And you'll go on there and say, I'm going to be on this mountain on this day, right? On this frequency.
Then you go on the internet and say, I'm going to be on this little mountaintop at this point in time on these frequencies, and everybody in the world is listening for you.
Yeah.
And I'll do the parks up there.
Yep.
Go to a national park and transmit for that. Everyone will try to stay in contact with you at that park.
Yeah.
And then, people go to different national parks and state parks and things like that. And transmit remotely.
We have Field Day, which I have up here, Field Day 2021, coming up at the end of June, the last full weekend of June. You guys can come out. You'll hopefully have your ham licenses by then. And even though you're a technician, if you're sitting with me on my radio, I'm an amateur extra, you can actually make contacts on HF. It's a contest that goes for 24 hours where everybody in the United States and Canada is trying to make as many contacts as they can. And we're logging it into a computer, and it's a contest. We get points, and it's great. It's fun, right? They've had special events. They had one that was like the original 13 colonies or something like that. I didn't get them all, but I tried, right? You can get every county. I mean, there's all these different things. I've gotten every state, and Delaware was my nemesis. Rhode Island and Delaware took me a while to get those ones. I finally got them now.
Sometimes they get a little carried away. There's one group that's trying to work all telephone prefixes.
it's fun, right? I mean, even if you don't get them all, you tried, right? So contesting, that's what we call that, contesting, right? So you got these special events, and what you're trying to do is, you got locations, you got distances, you're trying to get as far away as you can. The problem is you can only go so far because then you're coming back, right? Because round Earth. But it's fun stuff, right? So, this is a worked all states. I actually have one of those. Worked all counties, worked all continents, got that one. All these different things. Typically in a single sideband. SSB, there are digital ones, CW, they're those weak signal modes, right? Not going to do those FM so much. And what do you need? Well, the minimum information is who you are, your call sign, right? Your name, your location, a grid locator. My location at home is DM37LR. There's a grid. Comes up. There we go. That we overlay the world. And so you give a coordinate, like here's DM, right? 37 is like over here somewhere, LR. It tells somebody exactly where you are. And so people will chase the grid squares and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. This is actually, it's kind of the same thing, but I don't know, why don't we use Latin long? They came up with this system because the military, yeah.
This can actually define exactly where you are.
Yeah.
That's information.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because I can tell you in my house at where my station is, DM37 KP73
Right.
RU. And that literally defines me down to like 10 feet.
And my radio in the car will actually give it to you.
Mine's DM37KQ.
Yeah. I'm LR, KQ. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, does 360 stuff like that use that same criteria? I mean, to pinpoint where you're located?
What do you mean 360?
Well, it's just another program out there.
Oh.
Most of these can
Yeah.
get programs converted back and forth.
Yeah.
So you can go from latitude, longitude to maiden. This is the Maidenhead grid.
Yeah, this is the Maidenhead grid system.
So use this and then narrow it down.
Yep. Yeah. Like I said, my radio that's in my car has a GPS built into it. I just hit a button and it tells me exactly what grid square my car is in. Well, it's the radio, but it's GPS. It says, GPS goes, you're here? And it goes, yep, you're in DM37 whatever. And it'll actually give the other digits past that too. It's kind of fun. So if I'm running mobile and I want to know where I am so I can get on, national parks or SOTA or something like that, my radio tells me what I'm going to tell the person at the other end. You'll also do what's called a signal report, which is a little more complex. It's like 599. You're basically kind of interpreting the signal strength, how well you hear people. Those are things that you'll also exchange with the person at the other end. For field day, we have a special call sign for everybody in the club. So all of us are going to be using one call sign. So it's kind of cool. You basically have that attached to your club, your operating station right there. We're in 7U, yeah, November 7 uniform, yeah, this year. Sometimes we're a Whiskey 7 uniform, but the last few times we've been November 7. It depends on what's available and if I get to the database quick enough, because I'm the one that actually registered it. Yeah, so we'll be November 7 uniform. For that kind of contest, we're a 5 alpha, which means we have 5 stations, and we're running on off-grid power. So that's information that's specific to that club. So that's something else that we would exchange.
Field day is at least once a year. You're taking out all your portable equipment. You're operating off-grid, so you're either generating electricity or
solar
batteries or solar power or something. It's the idea that we're practicing our emergency skills and our equipment at least once a year.
Yep. And there's a winter field day too. Yeah.
If you could stand to do this in the middle of the
which actually wasn't too bad this winter.
Well, we had a unique time where it was actually
That was
colder
summer,
during
yeah.
the field day in June than it was for the following winter. It was very cold.
Yeah. So those are contests, and there's lots of different contests out there. Actually, like World War II museum ships will often have a ham radio on there, and you can actually make contact with them. I've made contact with the Hornet, which is kind of cool. There's a battleship. There's people do all kinds of different contests. It's great fun. So now it depends on what kind of like you're talking about, emergency services and stuff like that. Obviously, we use voice for that, but there's another mode that we often use too, and that's digital. So you can actually connect your radio with a computer. And you use what's called a TNC, which is what this little dangly box is right here. You can get different connections. This is actually a Bluetooth one, which will actually communicate with my phone. So I can control my radio from my phone, which is pretty cool. So I can use digital communications, transmit things from my phone to my radio. I use
The newer, larger radios will have a USB port built into it.
Mhm.
Have that TNC or thermal node
control. Yep.
built into the radio. So you can literally just hook your computer directly into your radio and start transmitting digital signals.
Yeah, the HF radios. Some of them, like I have one that's actually all mode, all band, will have that. And so you just basically plug it into your computer, and you just run your software, and away you go, which is pretty cool. So you can actually send pictures. You can send just text files. You can type to one another, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of different things you can do. Another thing you can do, and actually you'll hear people on the net, one of the things we'll say is, are there any Echolink stations out there? And I have an app on my phone, so I can be on the East Coast, use my phone, tie into Linda's computer and radio at her house, and join the net. That's called Echolink. There's also IRLP, which we have a node here too. Don't use that one as much, but Echolink right here. These things allow you to connect, again, computers to radios. And you're using VoIP, V-O-I-P, which is Voice over Internet Protocol. How many people have a landline? That's actually a real landline. Anybody have a VoIP? Have a phone that connects into your router? That's what I have, yeah. So my home phone isn't really a phone. It's actually an internet. My phone in my office at SUU is a VoIP, V-O-I-P. It's using that same protocol, voice over internet. I can use this to talk to a radio, to talk to everybody in this area in a repeater. It's kind of cool. And there are lists of these things that are published online, and repeater directories and stuff like that. And you can basically look these up, and I can talk to somebody in Australia off my phone. Now, for Echolink, you have to go on to their website and register your call sign. You have to have a call sign, and you have to prove it. You actually have to send a copy of your FCC license, and then they'll give you basically access to the Echolink. You don't have to do that with IRLP, but Echolink, they're very specific. They want you to register before you can use it. And then you let Linda know that you're going to want to use it, and she puts your call sign into her radio, or your computer, right? And then that way, when I'm in Hawaii one day, I can basically call in and check into the nets here. We've actually had people do that, which is pretty cool. That's Echolink.
For example, I'm going to be leaving Memorial Day, on Memorial Day, to head up to Salt Lake, to fly back east, because my brother needs a car driven across the country. So my intention each night is to join the local net.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to do through Echolink. And if you monitor the net this following week, you should be able to hear me check in if I can remember the time zone.
You have to have phone service. So I was last week. I was down at the Coral Pink Sand Dunes. There was no phone service. Like the week before, I had to drive up the road about not half an hour, maybe about, I don't know, 10 minutes, so I could basically start the thing for this class. So you have to have data on your phone. But if you have that, most places have that, it works, right? Kind of cool. Now, there are some other digital services. The one that we have around here is D-Star. There's also this thing called Wires2 and DMR. These are just different kinds of digital communications. D-Star is ICOM in Kenwood, I think. Wires2 is Yaesu. DMR is a bunch of radios. This is the digital mobile radio. It's kind of it's a commercial service that they've kind of co-opted into ham radio. But that one's kind of cool. That one actually uses this time multiplexing. If you watch the signal, it transmits, and another one transmits. You just see these little blocks kind of alternating time as they're sending the signal back and forth. My dad actually uses DMR where they are down in Arizona. We just don't have any of these set up around here. They're also kind of a pain to set up. I think my dad almost threw the radio out the window a few times. But these are just the other digital services that can be voice and things like that. It's kind of cool. And this is just a list of them. There's RTTY, which is an old one, PSK32, PSK31, MFSK. Now, one that you'll probably hear about, FT8. That's a weak signal one. That one you can get around the world in bad radio conditions. JS8 call. This is one that's kind of based on that. WSPR is kind of a beacon. Pactor, Winmore, JT65. Oh, this one's kind of fun. You can actually bounce signals off the moon. Yeah, moon bounce. So the JT65 can be used for that. You can also bounce signals off of radios at McCarran Airport. People are doing that. They're bouncing them off airplanes that are lined up to land at an airport, using that to get over the horizon. You can use, basically the parts of meteorites that have kind of burned up in the atmosphere. You can bounce them off of that, and that's just a mode that you can use. And these all come from different programs that are out there. They're kind of fun, just trying different things. George has done some of that, I think. These are just some voice ones, so FreeDV, D-Star, DMR. This is just a short list. Now, of course, the oldest one is CW. That's a digital mode, isn't it? On off. Digital, right? That's cool. WSJT is just a program that does a lot of these things. These are all kind of like the weak signal ones. You might download this software. There's other programs out there that do a lot of the same stuff. We can also, and I've done this, you can actually take routers, commercial routers, reflash the firmware. Now you have a ham net. It's actually I have one of my routers actually has is actually ham. It's using, there's actually a series of IP addresses that are only for ham radio. And it's kind of cool. So somebody actually bought a whole block of them, and I bought 5 of them from them. So I actually have a ham radio IP address on my router. Kind of cool. But you just take commercial software and you just modify it. So that's 5.6 gigahertz. So we're talking in the gigahertz there. And of course, TV signals, right? Anybody know what NTSC? That's actually that's your TV. You've heard PAL, stuff like that. This is your fast scan color TV signal. So you can actually send that kind of stuff on here too, which is kind of cool. So it's just all kinds of different software that you can use for these things. It's kind of cool. WSPR is kind of a beacon, see how things are going. And this is actually just showing FL Digi. This is just a program that we use for that. So I can actually type in right here, and as I'm typing, it's actually sending out those letters, and other people can see them, which is kind of fun. So you can send text messages, keyboard to keyboard. PSK31 is just one. That's actually, the 31 is just how fast it is, 31 baud on there. And there's just different ones. FSK, frequency shift keying. And those ones, these are actually packets. They actually have information about what's being sent. There's a header, there's the data. There's actually also this thing called a checksum, which tells the computer whether or not it received the signal correctly, and it'll resend it. So ARQ says, oh, I didn't get it, resend it. So it actually keeps going until you get the correct signal, or correct information. And the last thing I want to talk about, keyboard, I think I did that one already, is APRS. And this was actually taken today. That's George right here. We have another one of our hams up here. And we used that to track Linda in one of the races. This is automatic packet reporting system. It's connected to GPS, and you can use it to track where someone is. It's pretty cool.
Which I intend to do on the strip.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see where Ron is and go, hey, where's Ron? Oh, he's right here. It's pretty cool. Yes. Oh, okay. So a packet is it's literally a package of information, right? It's not the radio. It's the software gives it a header, which has the call sign, the destination. So it's like, who sent it and where is it going? That's usually in the header. The data, that's a picture of your cat, right? Or in this case, where you are, your GPS location, your speed and all that kind of stuff. And then this checksum, which says, okay, this is what all of this stuff kind of mathematically comes to, checks the number and says, oh, it matches, I got all of the data. So a packet is this information right here. That's all it is. And for APRS, it's connected to your GPS, so it's like your location, your speed, your heading. They actually had one that was on a hot air balloon that went over. It was really cool. So you can basically, it's not hot air, it's one of those helium or hydrogen balloons, weather balloon. They send it up and they put a APRS radio on there, and I watched it go across. You could see where the balloon burst. It even tells you like the altitude. The balloon bursts and the altitude starts dropping really fast. But then you can watch it come back, and it landed out by Summit. And it started out in Nevada near Pioche. Was it your dad or your father-in-law that did? But you could actually watch it go across using APRS. So it's pretty cool. So any questions? I think I'm out of time. I think I've gone a minute over. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. Oh, okay. Let's. Now, Ken's actually really good. He has a lot of good stuff. I will give Linda, Ron, somebody, you, the PowerPoint, the PDF, so you can put it up online. Yep. So I can give that. Yeah. So I'll give you these slides. Oh, you got it recorded here too. Yep. But I can give you the PDF too if you want. Yeah, I got it on a PDF. Yep. So hopefully everything that we talked about tonight, you remember it all, right? It is, but I actually put the questions at the end of the PDF. That's why I was thinking if you get the PDF, it has all of the questions. All of the answers are in the lecture. So everything you need to know is in the lecture. So it's in the book too. It's in the book. So everything you need to know should be in there. Any questions? You gonna go out and have some fun with the radio? Gonna do our fox hunt? Ah, come on, it's fun stuff. These are all things that you're gonna be able to do. So I'll turn it over to Ken.